Welcome to another episode of R&R Living Life. In this episode, we leave Gidget at Oski Roadhouse Caravan Park in the heart of the Gorge Country, just over half an hour's drive to the entrance of Karijini National Park. We knew we were in for a treat with over 627,442 hectares of rugged landscape, full of gorges, waterfalls, walking trails, amazing cliff faces, and an ancient landscape. The Karijini National Park was first created in 1969, incorporating lands around the Dales Gorge area. Subsequent additions to the park included Hamersley Gorge, when the park was named Hamersley National Park. Then in 1991 the park was renamed Karijini National Park in recognition of Aboriginal history and the continuing association of traditional owners. Our first stop was at the Albert Tognalini Lookout, with extremely scenic views of the Mungina Gorge, into the valley and down the gorge towards the roadhouse. Albert Tognalini was a former Commissioner of Main Roads in Western Australia, who early in his career during the 1960s to 1964 was responsible for major improvements, including extensive realignments to section of the Great Northern Highway, Victoria Highway and Duncan Road, and the construction of a new road through the Leopold Ranges to provide access to the North Kimberley. He was closely involved with the planning, investigation, route selection and construction of the Newman to Port Hedland section of the Great Northern Highway, and was still Commissioner when the project was completed in December 1989. It was so peaceful at the lookout, where we watched numerous trucks descending the pass with incredible scenery all around. From the lookout we made our way back onto the highway and headed towards Karijini Drive, that would take us to Karijini National Park in the Hamersley Ranges, located in the heart of the Pilbara. The national park is the second largest national park in Western Australia and incorporates 2 billion-year-old gorges where rain has cut 45-metre ravines, forming dramatic outcrops and tiered rock formations. Francis Gregory named the range after Edward Hamersley, a prominent promoter of his exploration expeditions in the northwest in 1861. To think that the evolution of this landscape started over 2,500 million years ago, when fine iron-rich sediments accumulated on an ancient seafloor. Then over a period of millions of years further sediments were overlaid, creating immense pressure on the sediment layers and transforming them into tough layers of rock. Horizontal compression caused the rocks to buckle and crack before rising up out of the water to form dry land. A drop in sea levels caused creeks and rivers to cut down through the rocks, creating the deep gorges of banded iron formations, dolomite similar to limestone, with a grey or pale brown colour, and the very soft pink or purple shades of Mount Macrae shale. Our first stop in the park was at the Visitor Information Centre, an unusual building set into the bushland and blending beautifully with the landscape. Inside the building there were numerous displays that tell the stories and cultural knowledge presented from traditional owners' perspectives. Colonial exploration began in 1861 when Francis Gregory led a party inland from a landing point at Hearson Cove near Dampier. By 1863 he reported good grazing lands in the area that attracted settlers to the region. Within 4 years there were over 31,000 sheep in the Northwest District, and by 1899 almost 700,000. Without the intimate knowledge of the land by the indigenous people, early leases would have failed. From the Visitor Information Centre we made our way to Dale's Campground, where we took a short walk to Circular Pools Lookout. Wow, what a sight! Below us was a large amphitheatre. In the centre was a circular, crystal-clear pool lined with ferns and trees, contrasting with the rich red terraced cliffs weathered by time. I could only imagine what it would have been like closer to midday when the sun was overhead, or when floodwaters flowed over the top of the cliffs into the pool below. I was awestruck at the red layered cliffs that lined the spectacular gorges, eroded by nature over billions of years. From Circular Pool we wandered along the rim of Dale's Gorge, where the steep cliff edges dropped away sharply, to the Three Ways Lookout on the point of Dale's Gorge. Along the cliff edge, the trail to the Circular Pool had a closed sign due to a millipede infestation. At the Three Ways Lookout, I was not keen on descending a ladder and then steep steps, so we chose not to do this trail and were happy just to enjoy the view from the top. Just to stand gazing out on this ancient geological formation was breathtaking. The rugged red walls of the gorge, with its abundant native vegetation of spinifex, mulga, ghost gums and fig trees, while far below a stream meandered between waterholes, providing a shady refuge in amongst the trees and ferns. It frustrates me when I can't bring myself to step over the edge, particularly when I can't see ground below my feet, even when I know just how spectacular the scenery would be if I could just make myself take that first step. But I think it would be worse if I got halfway and couldn't go any further. That would be terrifying, if not embarrassing. From the Three Ways Lookout we made our way to Fortescue Falls, the only spring-fed falls in Karijini National Park, where the water cascades down the gently sloped rocks into the pool at the base of Dale's Gorge. Here the red cliffs reach up from the gorge floor, covered in spinifex that cling to the edges, and snappy gums stand out against the red and grey hues of the landscape. What a wonderful place. From the car park, Rick and I had climbed down lots and lots of steps, thankfully with handrails, to descend to Fortescue Falls and Pool. What an amazing experience. From the base of the staircase we followed a short signposted track that led upstream to Fern Pool, with its small twin waterfalls, but we only ventured a short way along the trail, as I was unsteady on my feet and feeling a little claustrophobic so far down. The walls of the cliff face were covered in ferns, though a little worse for wear, in need of water. Rock figs clung to the ledges above our heads, their roots arrowing down to fresh water. It was so peaceful. Some of the flatter rocks were quite slippery, so it made it hard for my unsteady feet. Though there were quite a few groups of people at the bottom of the falls, it was enjoyable just watching and listening to the water as it flowed over the falls, giving me time to get my head and body ready for the climb back up all those stairs. The climb down wasn't as bad as I had thought it would be. Having a handrail helped, but also the mesh floor made me feel safer. The park headquarters is on the site of the old Mount Bruce outstation, known as Digman's Well. The lease was relinquished because of its low pastoral productivity. Hoofed animals had a major impact on the land, with environmental degradation arising from an over-optimistic assessment of carrying capacity, followed by heavy overstocking. Attempts to keep stock on land, gripped by inevitable droughts, led to catastrophic losses, and the country never again carried the original number of stock. Conservation now plays an important part in trying to restore and protect the major impacts that the last 150 years have had on the land. From the mid-1970s, cooperative programs for rehabilitation have been planned and undertaken in order to promote recovery of the seriously degraded areas. Some of these measures include fencing, reductions in stock numbers to complete removal of stock in certain areas, and the cultivation and seeding of some parts. Mining now has become a battleground for the park. We left Fortescue Falls around 4 o'clock, making our way back to Gidget. The setting sun over the ranges was magical. Just seeing it from a different perspective added another layer to our memories. Kalbarri and the surrounding area had had its fair share of incredible geological formations, but Karijini added another layer to this incredible area of Western Australia. Mother Nature has spent millions of years sculpturing these stunning landscapes. But we were not finished, as tomorrow we would be driving a loop towards Hamersley Gorge and on to Mount Tom Price. I have struggled over the last few episodes when putting together these videos, choosing what photographs to include. I must admit, not all that I would have liked to include, for this will end up being in a public domain, but I have had to remind myself of the reason I first started putting these videos together, and that firstly it was as a personal reflection for Rick and I to marvel, ponder, reflect on, and enjoy again where we had been, and secondly for my family and friends who we wanted to keep in touch with and show the places we had seen. This country is so remarkable, and there are some amazing places. We tend not to highlight the touristy activities, which there are a huge number of, but more of the country, history, and sometimes interesting facts about an area we are travelling through. Being brought up in the country underpins most of what we see and do, as we are not out there to showcase the adventure of it all, but the beauty of Mother Nature and the extremes of living in rural areas. The photographs are taken with a Nikon camera, usually out the window of the boat as we travel. In this episode we travelled along parts of Karijini Drive for the third time, and each time the scenery was different, with the time of day, whether or not there were clouds. The scenery changed every time. Often it is the colours or an interesting rock formation that catches my eye, but I have found that there is always something to see. Sometimes it is just the beauty of Mother Nature that I find interesting. I can only hope that you continue to enjoy the episodes that I put together. If so, give us a thumbs up. We made our way back along Karijini Drive to the highway. The colours of the ranges were so vastly different from when we had driven out to the national park. The setting sun and the angle it hit the mountains highlighted some of the ravines and seams in the rocks that earlier had been shaded. The sheer cliffs on some of the mountains was as if a giant had taken a knife and sliced off a section to leave jagged cliff faces, exposing the rock formations within the mountains. In places where there was full sun, caves, washouts and rock slides were easily seen. In the distance there appeared to be gentle curves on the mountains, so vastly different from the jagged and rugged formations of exposed rocks of the mountains close to the road. The following day we left the caravan park at Oski Roadhouse just as the sun made its way over the horizon and headed towards Wittenoom. Rick was enjoying driving on the gravel road, cut deep to a harder base, that was in good condition having been recently graded, though it did restrict being able to see above the edges of the road. We had followed a truck for quite a distance, as we could see his dust ahead, before being engulfed in dust from a fuel tanker, followed closely by two mine vehicles. We pulled over each time to let the dust settle, enough to see clearly before continuing on. Wittenoom is a former town and a declared contaminated site in the Hamersley Ranges, named by Lang Hancock after Frank Wittenoom, with whom he shared a nearby pasture lease, Mulga Downs Station, that operated as a sheep station, but is currently operating as a cattle station. The area around Wittenoom was mainly pastoral properties until the 1930s, when mining for blue asbestos began. Blue asbestos is a soft, friable fibre considered to be the most hazardous, possibly 100 times more hazardous than white asbestos, as the fibres are much smaller. By 1939, major mining began in the Empire Gorge, which was closed in 1943 when mining began in Wittenoom Gorge. In 1947, a company town was built near the mine, and during the 1950s it was the Pilbara's largest town. The name Wittenoom was approved in 1948, but it was not until May 1950 that the town site was officially gazetted. In 1951, the name was changed to Wittenoom Gorge at the request of the mining company, but in 1974 it was changed back to Wittenoom. During the 1950s and early 1960s, Wittenoom was Australia's only supplier of blue asbestos. The mine was shut down in 1966 due to its unprofitability and growing health concerns from asbestos mining in the area, and was then declared a contaminated site, comprising 46,840 hectares, making it the largest contaminated site in the Southern Hemisphere, an area nearly one-fifth the size of Chernobyl exclusion zone. In June 2007, the town was officially degazetted, and the town's name was removed from official maps and road signs, and the Shire of Ashburton was able to close roads that lead to contaminated areas. In September 2022, Wittenoom had no remaining residents, and demolition of remaining structures by the Western Australian Government began in May 2023. As we drove through Wittenoom, all that was left was the bougainvillea, the power poles, and piles of dirt restricting entry to any part of where the town had once been. It was eerie to think just how big and important the town had once been, and I do understand that it was vital to close it down. But I also wonder just how many other small rural towns who aren't faced with such a massive contamination are going to continue to survive in this harsh modern environment, where once small communities that serviced the industries in the area, railway stations, cattle and sheep properties, were once the backbone to the area, where once there were communities built around the mining industry or the pastoral stations. Now it is all about fly-in, fly-out operations or contract mustering. Even automated trains and rail corridors where railway crossings have automated UHF warnings kilometres from the crossing to alert travellers. Dust and more dust, this time as the fuel truck and some mine vehicles passed. On all the gravel roads we have travelled on, thankfully we have been lucky enough not to have had a problem with it, either in the boat that was missing a rear door seal or in Gidget, thanks to the caravan. In this area, the fine red dust usually gets into everything, and by the time we were back at the roadhouse, the boat was covered in a coating of red. We used the dust buster to get most of it off, as washing it was not an option. In some places, the road gave way to areas of bull dust covering everything for quite some distance from the road in a coating of very fine red. It was strange to see red trees instead of green ones, and depending on the road, if it was gravel or bull dust, made all the difference. It was an eerie sight, but then again, the Pilbara is known for its red dirt. We will leave you for this episode at the bottom of Hamersley Gorge. Join us next time as Rick descends into the gorge while I watch from the lookout, before making our way to Mount Tom Price, officially the highest town in Western Australia, and then on to Weeno Gorge. Give us a thumbs up if you enjoyed this episode. Take care and stay safe. Cheers for now. Rick and Rosemary. R&R, living life.